And we are live. This is the post-match review show for Manchester United nil, Manchester City 2, um, in the Carabao Cup semi-final. And of course, we're just going to go through the main talking points, ins and outs of the match, and just discuss where things went right, and where things went wrong on what ultimately, as I sort of described it within the description box, was a very sobering and disappointing result. In a competition which we were one step away from getting to the final in. Yes, obviously the all the talk going into this was how Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was going to set up. We're coming off the back of what was a very busy festive schedule and period, and for the first, what Ollie went with quite a strong team. Shall we say? He went with, comparatively to the previous match, I think there were only two changes. So one of the things that Ollie had criticism levelled at him for was this, kind of his Tinkerman approach this season, where we had many changes in personnel from match to match. But on this occasion, it was a case of where Ollie had only made two changes. Dean Henderson came in goal, and of course Victor Lindelof came back from his, I believe it was a back injury, back into the starting lineup. But other than that, a relatively unchanged team, and also a relatively strong team that had previously served Ollie well over this, like I've mentioned, the festive period. Unfortunately, even one or two changes can upset the apple cart and can disrupt the overall team formation and the tactics within the match. And I felt that with Eric Bailly and Harry Maguire in defence over the past four matches, I believe it has been since Victor Lindelof, had his injury and Bailly's come in, we've seen a very different Manchester United in terms of our attacking verve. More of a more aggressive approach, a more assertive approach higher up the field, due to Eric Bailly's pace, which hasn't allowed any marauding attackers to escape on the counter-attack, and it's allowed us to play much further forward. Bringing Victor Lindelof in there, you lose that pace, and although there were necessarily no speedy attacking players from Manchester City, it was a case of where there was always that threat, because when Harry Maguire and Victor Lindelof have played together, we just see often how static they can be, and how scared as well they are if the ball goes in behind them. And I think, again, you saw a very different, more dogged, determined and defensive display from Manchester United in this match. And again, it's all very well almost in hindsight perhaps for me to say this, but I did feel like Eric Bailly getting dropped after some magnificent performances, arguably our best, one of our best players he's been over this Christmas period, and to be dropped for Victor Lindelof must have been a real kick in the teeth for Eric Bailly. You'd have thought that his performances might have warranted a start in an important semi-cup final cup tie. But Ollie, went for Victor Lindelof, and it was his opinion, as I believe in the pre-match he said, it was his opinion that he wanted. He thought that Lindelof and Maguire worked well together, and that they were the partnership he was going for in the semi-final. Overall, there were some really good defensive displays. Somewhat. I mean, a lot of people said that Harry Maguire had a good match, but ultimately, from my own point of view, it wasn't necessarily the best decision to throw Victor Lindelof in cold into such an integral match. This was lest we forget, this was the fourth semi-final in relatively speaking a year, in which Ollie had the chance to break our semi-final hoodoo. And unfortunately, it's a case of Groundhog Day again, as we slip into cup semi-final elimination, which has been so often the story over the past 12 or so months. with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at the wheel and with these players ultimately, because that's the really sort of important takeaway here, is that it's not just on Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, although I will be getting into some of the tactics they employed, and obviously have criticised him for some of the personnel changes that he made, particularly, like I said, Victor Lindelof coming in for Eric Bailly, but it is on the entire team. It's the entire team's fault and the entire club that have to take accountability for a real frailty and a real lack of mettle in these important, semi-final matches. Also, just briefly before I go on, we've got a message from Alexander Samsung, who's just said hello. So thank you very much for joining us, Alexander. That's very much appreciated. Yes, in the semi-final, in these semi-final matches, we've obviously competed against, if we look at them all one by one, we've competed against Manchester City, which was obviously last year in the Carabao Cup and got eliminated over 2 legs. We competed against Chelsea in the FA Cup semi-final, and then Sevilla in the Europa League semi-final, and now again Manchester City, almost a full year, if not a full year, since the previous elimination in another semi-final, the Carabao Cup. The most disappointing thing for me is that in all 4 of these matches, United could be expected to hold their own, and it really does speak to a lack of fibre, a lack of real grit and resolve if you're losing this many semi-finals in a row. It has been brought up to me that potentially these teams are just better than us. I'm not necessarily sure that you could apply that. Certainly, they've been better on the day or the night in question, but this the same Manchester United team who are this is the same Manchester United team who are who have beaten many of these sides previously in competitions. So it's very much a case of where they should be doing better when they've had the opportunity to do so. Just going to bear with me one moment. Yes, apologies about that. Yes, ultimately, in all of these matches, we played against teams who I feel like we've got a good enough squad, a good enough team on paper to beat them. And in the end, if we look at the Manchester City, we've beaten them plenty of times over the past year or so with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in charge. In league matches, we obviously did the double over them for the first time since I believe it was 09-10, I think it was. We beat Chelsea in that season. We lost to them in the semi-final 3 times, I believe it was, and another time in the previous season. So, and obviously we've definitely got a team, I think, good enough to beat Sevilla. On paper, I feel like we've got a better side than them, and I will argue that with anybody. And then, of course, against City today. So, it really does feel like when the the going gets tough, when all the competitions there, that this club at the moment, I just really don't have the resolve to see the job completed. We've also got a comment here from Alexander Samsung. Apart from the mistake, Maguire was probably our best player going to the end of the game. Yeah, I mean, it was good. Maguire did do very well, but I think again, it was a case of where Manchester City had a lot of the ball, and Maguire was very much called upon quite often to deliver. But as you've sort of spoken about there, Alexander, the mistake that he made for that goal, at such a critical time, and again, at the highest level in these biggest matches, single goals can make a real difference, and that's how it proved really. So yes, I've spoken about the mentality and sort of given you a brief overview of my thoughts in terms of what it has been the 4th semi-final in a row that we've lost. But let's sort of move on to the game really, and of course we've analysed the teams in a bit greater detail. But in terms of the overall team performance, Um, if we go through the opening half, first of all, so we'll start with it. There was a couple of disallowed offside goals. In fact, there were 3 of them altogether in the opening exchange. I think it was opening 5 to 10 minutes. That we had various things where obviously a ball ricocheted back off John Stones, but there'd been a offside in the build-up, and then a couple of times we were quite lucky playing quite a high line, and again there were a couple of offsides, which were correctly given. Obviously, we were lucky that we had VAR just in case any of those decisions might have been incorrect. But obviously, 3 offsides in the first few minutes, and it seemed like the game was quite open, and that there was going to be, it was going to be quite a few goals in the match. Considering Manchester City, though, were dominating possession, throughout that first half an hour, first half altogether, really. And it didn't seem like Manchester United were really creating much. Manchester City, on the other hand, were, we were relatively keeping them at bay, and I think that was mentioned in the commentary as well. There were quite a few good defensive plays from us. I don't necessarily think that, other than the sort of offside goals that Manchester City scored, I don't clearly remember them having many chances in that first half. I think that Manchester United were, relatively safe and secure in the defence, but that was helped by the fact that everyone was getting behind the ball often, which limited our attacking opportunities as well, of course. We've spoken again, not to go back to it or, in too many times, but we've spoken again that with Victor Lindelof and Harry Maguire playing, Manchester United, whether it's a conscious thing or subconscious element, always do seem to fall back or creep back into their shell, and everyone seems to play a lot further, a lot deeper. So, of course, that was always going to help or assist in terms of defending manfully and willfully against a determined Manchester City attack, who were really, to be honest with you, were quite lacking a focal point. Having said that, Kevin De Bruyne was playing in the false 9, and one real opportunity that I do recollect from that first half was when Kevin De Bruyne got the ball in a bit of space. Harry Maguire and Victor Lindelof, typically standing off, and Kevin De Bruyne unleashes a rasping shot, which hits the post with Dean Henderson beating all ends up, and really that did sort of summarise or summate some of the reluctance of Harry Maguire and Victor Lindelof to go to the ball and go to the attacker sometimes in that first half. When Eric Bailly and Harry Maguire play together, you do see, I feel in a way, you do see that Harry Maguire, it does make more of a proactive effort to get forward and to get to the man or get to the ball, because he does realise that Eric Bailly will cover for him, and he does have the required and requisite pace in order to compensate for him. So, yes, again, obviously, defensively, relatively, other apart from that shot, because we did have so many men behind the ball. There weren't too many opportunities for Manchester City. And obviously from our own point of view, we were trying, I think, to employ the high press, and I do think that did work to a certain degree. We did, create quite a few opportunities, or at least where it seemed like we might have a surplus of men in the forward areas for ourselves. But unfortunately, in those situations and occasions, there was a real lack of quality and a real lack of delivery from, on occasion, it was, Pogba, Bruno, Martial and Rashford, all of them are quite guilty of giving up possession in, silly areas. There was, of course, on our sort of, behalf in that first half, I think the only sort of, real opportunity that we had of great note, to be fair, we did have an opportunity from Harry Maguire with his head, which was glanced on from a corner. But again, no one sort of read it. Anthony Martial, I think, and Victor Lindelof coming in at the back post, but neither of them, were able to make the correct one to get onto that glancing header. But of course, the one I'm sort of really noting is when Marcus Rashford was bursting in against Zinchenko, who I think he did have the running on. I wanted to see him, take advantage of that more. But ultimately, on this particular instance of note, he did come in against Zinchenko and obviously fired off a driving shot. And I think it was Ruben Diaz, who I will speak about at some point, with an incredible block, which all the Man City players came over and congratulated him for, because it was almost a goal-saving block. And it always felt like, for me, that the first goal, as it often has done in these, real nail-biting, occasions where it's, high quality, a highest level of competition, it's those sort of moments that really do make a real impact or difference to how which way that a tie will go. And obviously the Manchester City players were elated and congratulated Ruben Diaz on a brilliant block, but other than that, in particular, I thought Bruno Fernandes was trying far too much. Some of his passing and shooting, even as we moved into the second half, was shocking. He was trying too much to play the killer pass, the ball, particularly in that first half. I think at the very end of it, Manchester City were maybe tiring, and I think we did have more of the bulk of the possession in those latter stages of the first half. And Bruno, I think, within that last minute or so of that first half, had a couple of opportunities where a better ball or better delivery would have seen us take the lead. And he failed to deliver. But like I said, it wasn't just Bruno in that attacking third. I think Martial, Rashford, a couple of heavy touches here and there. And again, like I've alluded to previously, a real lack of final ball, final shot, or whatever it might have been. And of course, we're going in at half time with the scores deadlocked at 0-0. And I feel like Manchester United and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer would have been the happier of the two managers at that point, given, as I've just mentioned previously, how much of the ball Manchester City saw and how much they dominated possession. Obviously created very little again. So again, these were all very positive points for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at this juncture. We moved on to the second half, and of course, we already saw from Manchester City, I think, an uptake or upkick in the tempo, and a couple of gears maybe that they went up. Really sensing that the game was theirs for the taking. And they obviously attacking, but I believe it was the 50th minute that we saw the first goal for Manchester City. I think it was Scott McTominay with quite a cynical foul, which was on the corner just outside the area, maybe about 5 to 10 yards back on the left-hand attacking side, as Manchester City would look at it. The ball was whipped in, and it obviously evaded Raheem Sterling. I think it was Paul Pogba, Rashford were on the front part of the post, and so of course it also evaded Harry Maguire, as well as, like I said, Pogba, Rashford, Lindelof, Sterling, and Luke Shaw's man, John Stones. You've got to be in it to win it, I think, and the ball could have gone anywhere. But John Stones, credit to him, has fully read it and has finished, or just sort of gleefully prodded it home. In terms of where the sort of fault lies, again, you could level it at quite a few players and quite a few different aspects of it. There was the element that maybe Pogba or Rashford could have cleared it as the ball was coming across. I certainly think that Harry Maguire and Victor Lindelof, the ball had dropped sufficiently enough by that point for one of them to have made maybe a touch to get it away, and there was a real lack of taking control and assured nature of the defence, which is something we've seen time and time again over this season when we've conceded goals. There's a real lack of anyone taking charge, putting a foot through it and getting the ball clear. And again, that was in full evidence with that first goal. I think Luke Shaw, almost stopped his run, and so did Harry Maguire. And John Stones continues his run and really is able to finish, unchallenged. It would have been one thing perhaps if he'd managed to get the ball, managed to score, but you want to really see your defenders trying to influence or trying to put him off from making that goal scoring touch, and there was no evidence of that. And obviously, moreover, on a more overall level, you can't just blame the personnel for a free kick when you concede. You've also got to look at the overall marking and the tactics behind how we're defending set pieces, which of course I'll go on to in terms of the second goal as well. But also we've seen it across the board, I think, this season. So many goals conceded from set pieces, corners and free kicks. These are the real basic elements of football. And, you've really got to work on these aspects on the training ground, from a tactical standpoint, to make sure that you don't keep conceding these silly errors, silly goals, because those do make the difference, as I've spoken about, in high level professional football. And so it proved again today. Yes, and so obviously Manchester City at that point, as I've spoken about, had taken the lead 1-0 to the good. Manchester United, to our credit, were trying different things. I was quite shocked that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer didn't necessarily make a change. I thought that we might have looked to have made a change at that point, particularly given the fact that we did have in this semi-final 5 substitutions to utilise within the potential 120 minutes, but obviously the 90 minutes if you could win it within that. And he was really reluctant. I think it was about 20 minutes or so that elapsed since that goal for him to make a substitution. So he clearly felt that the personnel out there were sufficient or good enough to get the job done. We saw Manchester City, and that's the aspect of this. We saw the Manchester City went back and retreated themselves into a more pragmatic and defensive show. But we saw from Manchester United that when we had more of the ball, we again, failed to deliver in terms of the final balls. And of course, it's always harder. I would say it's always harder when you're going up against a team that's defending a lead, because you feel you need to push things a lot more and show great urgency. But there was no real guile. There was scarcely any chances really, that anybody created. I can't necessarily think of a shot or attempt that we had where I thought, that's a real opportunity of note that we've created there. A couple of opportunities. Obviously, Pogba got the ball on the left-hand side, I seem to remember, at one point, and just squared it back to Bruno, who blasted over. Bruno was trying, and so had other players during that match as well, trying to blast it in from miles out, because there was a real frustration, in that case. Harry Maguire, we obviously had a couple of shouts maybe for handball, but again, it would have been quite, lucky if we'd got those. But really, it was just aimless crossing the ball into the box, and obviously trying to win on occasion penalties. I think Anthony Martial went down with very little to no touch from Ruben Diaz to try and win a penalty. But other than that, we were really, really struggling for anything of real note. And obviously Ollie, he made a couple of substitutions at points during the game. The first substitution that was made obviously was taking off Scott McTominay to try and bringing on Mason Greenwood to try and change things. I think it was probably about the 70th minute. I think it was somewhere in between 70 and 75 minutes, bringing on Mason Greenwood to try and add us some firepower. We saw Greenwood, on occasion dancing past defenders and trying to get his shot off, but there was through a forest of bodies, and every single time it was blocked, especially by Ruben Diaz, who I did say I would mention, but exceptional player really, as a real rock of a defender and a real good acquisition by Manchester City, and he was unbeatable really today. There was nothing we could do to get past him. We should have perhaps tried harder, but Ruben Diaz is a top quality player and was easily man of the match for Manchester City. A real quality buy that they've made in the summer, which could be the difference, now as we sort of head towards May for where their title aspirations themselves would lie. But of course, we're hoping that Manchester United will brush this off and really push on and try and progress and try and win this league, as we move towards May. The second goal, it came at a point when we were really trying to push for the game. Manchester City were trying to exploit a lot of the holes that we had on the break, but to be fair, they didn't really create too much on the break. But of course, we give away another corner, and we all know that corners are our kryptonite, to use a Superman analogy, a real weakness of ourselves. And so it proved again, as the ball was, crossed in from the right, and then sort of flicked away, half cleared by Wan-Bissaka. that was something I really did note as well, was that with Ruben Diaz, when he headed the ball clear, more often than not, he would find a Manchester City player. They were controlled headers, really important defensive clearances, but he's always looking for a Manchester City player to pass it to. And that was quite a wild clearance from Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Unfortunately, it did go to Fernandinho, who then slotted the ball home from long range, past a prone Dean Henderson. But really, we really do need to get better at these set pieces, as I've mentioned previously. Another corner where we've conceded from, and another free, another set piece action that has gone against us. So yeah, really sort of annoying. And at that point, of course, the game is lost at 2-0. We know that there's not really going to be a way back, particularly given how poorly all of our players were playing. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer brings on Van der Beek almost as a token gesture at that point, but really we don't create anything of great note in the final stages, and of course that leads us to the final outcome of Manchester City 0, Manchester United, I should say, 0, Manchester City 2 in the semi-final of the Carabao Cup. No two legs this time, only one leg, so we have been eliminated. And really this sort of lends us to there's a real crossroads, I think, in the season, this as well as it was with Leipzig last month. It does feel like we are very much the nearly men at the moment, and what that's going to take to change that and really turn some of this hope and optimism into real rewards with trophies, it remains to be seen. Whether that is, I know that there's quite a few people who are, Ollie in or Ollie out, or Ollie skeptical, so to speak. But we really do have to ask some questions about whether it is the coaching staff or whether it is these players, and what players we need to bring in to try and bridge a gap. And like I said, it might not necessarily even be bridging a gap in terms of personnel or squad, because ultimately, on the evidence of the league form this season, we are right in amongst it, and we've still got a good chance in that. And like I've spoken about before, we have beaten a lot of these teams previously, in other ties. So it's really that sort of semi-final mentality that doesn't necessarily seem to be there, and whether you apportion that towards the players or the manager, or really both, is ultimately your decision. In terms of my overall thoughts of the match, and a man of the match, which we often look to give at this stage of the post-match review, I think probably for me, I'm going to give it to Dean Henderson. I thought that in the second half, Manchester City were pushing on quite a lot, especially when we were trying to push for the equaliser. And I thought there were quite a few good, competent saves from him. I thought he was keeping us in it. It was a good save from Mahrez, rasping, driving shot, and a couple of other smart actions. And in the first half and so forth, and second half, I thought Dean Henderson had a overall good and creditable game, and couldn't really do anything about the 2 goals that we conceded. I think for Fernandinho, he was quite unsighted, and ultimately Fernandinho, had struck it so far in the corner that it was exceptionally unlikely that he would have got there, even had he read it. And obviously John Stones at point blank range, there's very little that a goalkeeper can do in that situation. It's really the sort of defenders that we need to be looking at, and I couldn't necessarily give it to Maguire, although Alexander spoke about earlier in the show, although there was a shout for him to be the best player. He also talks about the mistake as well, and I couldn't necessarily give it to Maguire, when again some of the defensive actions from the defenders on set pieces have cost us ultimately in another big match. So yes, quite a ultimately just a very disappointing evening, I think, for Manchester United club, fans, players, staff, and everyone who is associated with the club itself. Where we go from here, is anyone's real guess. We've still got 3.5 weeks, I believe it is, of the transfer window. Let me just double check that. Yeah, we've got about 3.5 weeks of the January transfer window left. Has been confirmed, I believe, by Ed Woodward that he would look to increase or secure recruitments. But there's not, other than Caicedo, the central defensive midfielder of Ecuador, there isn't necessarily anyone that we've been linked with that I could have felt that I can feel that might come in at this point, but it remains to be seen whether this match, on a sobering evening, it remains to be seen whether Ed Woodward will splash the cash, so to speak, in this January window. And that, as I said, we'll have to see, whether he will do or not. From Manchester United's point of view on the actual pitch, we've got to dust ourselves off, brush ourselves down, and really try to concentrate now. I think we've got the FA Cup third round, on the weekend, but ultimately at the moment, our main aspiration and main goal should be the league. Thanks to Liverpool dropping points recently, we've got a real opportunity now against Burnley, I believe, in about a week's time, and then against Liverpool at Anfield, we've got a real opportunity to grasp the mettle in that competition, and that could represent a real galvanising effect after this crushing loss, really, which would have really dented the confidence of the boys. And we're just hoping that they can still continue the excellent league form that has seen us climb from, I believe it was 14th, I think it was, we were about 10 matches ago, to joint top with a game in hand. We're just going to have to hope that this represents a temporary blip, and that United can continue some good form in the league. We can, really push on in this January and on into February and March as firmly in this title race as possible. Again, only time will tell how long, or how well that effort and endeavour will be rewarded. But that's all I've got to say about the match. Very very disappointing match ultimately, like I keep on saying. But we move on, and we're hopefully moving on to better things in the Carabao Cup. Obviously, is exit, and we've got to look towards the league from now on. This has been the Real United Talk. You can follow us on Twitter, obviously at Real United Talk. Remember to like, share, and subscribe in terms of the YouTube channel. We are looking to grow and really burgeon out throughout this particular year, and we always want to get more and more people involved. So if you feel like you want to get involved, then do direct message us on Twitter, or maybe in the comments of the YouTube video that you want to get involved. But thank you very much for tuning in, and good night.